Let's talk.
John Brown.
Maestro, a portrait of Garry Sobers, cricket's greatest all-rounder, the greatest cricketer of his generation, who rose from poverty in Barbados to become West Indies captain and receive a knighthood. But his life was full of drama and controversy, both personal and political. Delighted to say that I'm joined live on the line by the man behind this book. Maestro, it's David. Am I thinking is it Tossell?
Tossell, yeah.
I was trying it in a sort of French accent. Good morning to you, David. How are you,
Good morning.
sir?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good.
Thanks for having me.
Now, for even those who don't know anything about cricket, Sobers is one of those people that they should know, or his name transcends the noble game itself. What about your background? What compelled you to write this, and why are you so eminently qualified to write the definitive book on Garry?
Well, I'll let other people decide whether I'm eminently qualified or not. Funnily enough, Garry Sobers is one of my first cricket memories. My dad took me to the Oval in 1970, and he was playing for the rest of the world team against England, and I sat there on a Friday afternoon on the boundary watching him and Graham Pollock, the great South African, put on close to 200 in a fantastic partnership. It just felt to me like no one had ever really done a really sort of comprehensive story of Garry Sobers, and he's such a major figure in the sport that it felt like he'd been a little bit underserved. He wrote a few versions of his autobiography over the years. They weren't particularly great, maybe a little bit lacking insight. He was a very modest and shy man, and I don't think he really was interested in putting his own career into any kind of context. So it felt for the benefit of people who knew Sobers and were fans of him and wanted a sort of a comprehensive guide to his life, and also for those younger people who maybe had heard the name every now and again, because he keeps cropping up in cricket commentaries even now. We wanted to know a little bit more about him, that this was the time to do it.
Because you might not just know it as Sir Garfield Sobers. That's enough. That's how many schoolboys who grew up in the 70s and 60s would know him. So was he much more informal? Was he much more informal and self-effacing than being Sir, Garfield Sobers?
Yes, he was. He has one story about when he did use it. He was in a hotel lobby with the Sri Lankan team when he was their coach, and no one was taking any notice of him. And he finally, he was getting a call from someone from Mr. Sobers, and he went to say, I am Sir Garfield. Your Queen gave me the honour. At least you can do is to use it. But he was a modest man. He didn't like talking about himself particularly, and maybe that's one of the reasons why his own autobiographies weren't particularly satisfying. A writer called Will Buckley wrote about him in 2001. He said he doesn't like talking about his achievements, but it's his curse that's so great with those achievements. Everyone wants to talk to him about them, but he wasn't really interested in analysing his own career. And sort of trying to figure out why he was so good. He was just a modest man who loved cricket and had quite a simple approach to life, if you know what I mean.
And he comes from, and this is, I think what you did brilliantly is because people will think the West Indies, the Windies, and they just think, it's all one happy nation of smiling, though deadly fast bowlers. But he's from Barbados, and there's a huge cultural difference between Barbados, Antigua, Trinidad and Tobago, and Jamaica. And it's we can quite easily just think it comes from one sort of cultural background, but it doesn't. And Garry comes from literally dirt poor, and his father dies when he's only 4.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he was on a boat during a ship during the war that got torpedoed. The interesting thing about Garry is that he doesn't make a big deal of even stuff like that, so his own childhood, he was very poor, and Barbados was a very hierarchical society in those days, so even within sort of the black community, there was different levels, and they were absolutely at the bottom. But, he was one of these people who said, basically we were poor, but we were happy, that sort of cliche. Yeah. And there were various other things about his childhood that he just kind of glosses over. He was born with 6 fingers on each hand, and he basically took the extra finger off himself, and he talks about that in one of my autobiographies, just as a throwaway line. For some people, they would go into great description about the huge trauma of it. He mentions a younger child who and the phrase he uses is very, very jarring. I had a younger child, but a younger sibling, but they died in an accident with a kerosene lamp. I mean, heaven knows what kind of horror that must have brought to the family. But Sobers had no interest in either talking about it or going into it. So yeah, his childhood was one of deprivation, I guess. But to him, as I say, it's a cliche, but it was normal, and he didn't know anything different. And cricket was his way out of that poverty.
So when does he sort of first come? Does it? People first start to notice, this young kid from Barbados. Is he obviously he's playing local cricket, and he becomes the hottest thing in Barbados? How's it all pan out?
Yeah, he plays the sort of the normal sort of street versions of cricket that kids would play in those days, and he would spend all day every day doing it. His mother, trying to bring up loads of kids on her own, would kind of let them get on with their own thing. And if they were playing outside the house playing cricket, at least you knew where they were. So cricket was always a big part of his life. He was very small, and he used to surprise people at how good he was. So even by age 10 or 11, he's starting to get noticed, and the senior players at the local clubs are asking him to come down and bowl at them in the nets, and a West Indies captain who's got to prepare to face India and face a left-arm spinner gets young Garry to bowl at him, and he gives him a $50 every time he sort of hits the stump. So he kind of realised that actually there is money to be made in this sport quite quickly. But it's by age 16 he's progressed through the Barbados cricket ranks, and he's making his debut for the island, and then becomes a Test player at only 17. At the time, he was the third youngest Test player in cricket history. So it was a very quick, sort of rapid rise to the top. He got noticed very quickly.
And from there, I mean, presumably he gets an offer to go to the UK and go to and that must have been quite a cultural shift for him as well.
Yes, it was. I mean, when he went on tour with the West Indies first time, it was, even when he played for the West Indies for the first time and had to go to Jamaica, it was the first time he'd ever left the country. And he did enough in his early Test career to be offered a chance to come to England. Now, at that time, in the late 50s, overseas players weren't allowed in county cricket, but the league cricket scene in the north of England was a hotbed of international players. And that was really where cricketers from somewhere like the West Indies, who didn't have a culture of professional cricket, were able to make a living. So Garry came over to England in sort of 1958, had a long and successful league cricket career, and he was almost sort of one of the first real global international cricketers, because from that time on, sort of from 1958, he basically never had any time off. He was either playing in the West Indies, he was playing a league season in England, or he'd be on tour with the West Indies somewhere. So he really did become a sort of 365 days a year professional cricketer, which, for the time was quite unusual.
And obviously, he hits this sort of like peak, I suppose, in the early 60s, and comes up against some of the greats. I mean, you're thinking about the Aussies and Lilly, for example.
Yes, I mean probably sort of 60 to 67, 68. His absolute peak of his powers, was scoring magnificent centuries. In Australia, one of the things that gets forgotten about the famous Tides Test in Brisbane in 1960-61 was that Sobers had started that match off with a century that a lot of people said was the best one they'd ever seen in Australia. He was very successful when he came over with the West Indies in England in 1963 and 66. He was by far and away the best player on the field. In 1966, he achieved something that no one has ever achieved in Test cricket, which was 700 runs and 20 wickets in a series. And the team was really sort of on his shoulders. And by that time, by the mid-60s, he'd become captain, which was a very significant moment in West Indies cricket. Now, Frank Worrell, before him, had become the first full-time black captain of the West Indies cricket team. But Sobers taking over for him in some ways was even more significant, because Worrell was kind of middle class. He'd been educated at an English university. So while it was hugely significant, Sobers was really the first time that the West Indies could really say they had one of their own, if you like, as captain, because he hadn't had any of the benefits of education or anything that Worrell had, and was sort of a man of the people, leading his nation for the first time. So that period, to the mid-60s was the absolute peak of his powers.
And can you argue that sort of he lays the sort of foundations for what will become, the Windies as I sort of remember, Clive Lloyd and the fast bowling and the batting and, putting England to the sword basically in various texts during the sort of the early to mid-70s?
Yes, I mean, he was part of, probably, the first great West Indies team, really. That team of the early 60s, mid-60s, was every bit as good as the Clive Lloyd team of the 70s and 80s, beating England on England's own soil. And I think the difference between that team and Clive Lloyd's team was how big a contribution Sobers made himself. I mean, people compare the 63 and 66 teams, and they said 66 was all about Sobers. He carried so much weight on his shoulders, which was even magnified by the fact that he was now had to be captain as well. And captaincy was not particularly a great strength of his, as it turned out. So yeah, that West Indies team was a fantastic unit, and Sobers suffered by the end of the 60s because he was starting to lose some of the great players that he had, and his captaincy suffered as a result of that.
And he didn't let the captaincy get in the way of sort of enjoying his lifestyle, should we say?
He didn't know. I mean, that was one of the reasons why he was sort of a bit reticent about accepting the captaincy. I mean, he saw what a great honour it was, and I think even he, as modest as he was, would have realised that from a cricketing perspective, he was the only real choice because he was so far and away the best player. But he'd famously been sort of outside the rules, if you like. So captains like Frank Worrell had accepted that any kind of disciplinary system they put in place didn't really apply to Garry Sobers. If they had a midnight curfew, then forget it, Garry. He could go out till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, as he famously loved to do, in the casinos, having a drink, get back to his hotel at 5 o'clock, couple of hours sleep, be out on the field and whacking the ball all over the place and taking wickets. Now, when Sobers became captain, he realised that, hang on, I can't really sort of be a law unto myself. Yeah. So I've got a choice. Either I curtail my own lifestyle by putting in rules that I don't really want to follow, or I just forget the rules completely, which is the way he went. And, not everyone can go out till 3 o'clock in the morning and perform in the way that Garry Sobers did. So his captaincy again suffered from that because he wasn't prepared to compromise his own lifestyle for the benefit of what might have been a better approach to captaincy.
It's interesting, isn't it? And that sort of maverick approach, or that sort of, I mean, I suppose if you can do it, if you're able to deliver the goods, on the field when it matters, it doesn't matter if you've gone to bed at 3 days before and still can't hit a ball, then it's no thing. But if you've got in 5 minutes before and just whack the thing all over the, boundaries and whatever, so that you can kind of forgive that. But there is a sort of £600 the elephant in the room, and that is called Rhodesia. And it's, I mean, this is a huge thing that he does. So talk us through it.
So he's just finished the 1970 season in England, and he gets offered a chance by a couple of South African players to go and play in a double wicket tournament in Rhodesia. Rhodesia at the time, because of its sort of fascist regime, had been banned from international sport. Cricket didn't recognise it. So it really was a big step for him to go there. It was, as you say, £600 for a kind of weekend knockabout tournament. He was there for 48 hours, in and out. Came home, and I think he genuinely couldn't believe the uproar that there had been. Sobers was very, closed to nuance and didn't really sort of understand maybe a lot of world affairs. You could say that he should have known. He'd just been playing in an England v Rest of the World series that had come about because the South African tour of England had been banned because of South Africa being banned. So you could say it should have been on his mind, this whole issue, but it wasn't. He just saw it as a chance to make some money playing cricket. People said, well, Rhodesia are welcoming black and white players to this tournament. So he said, fine, okay, I'll do it. He really didn't expect the storm that developed around it. The big criticism that people had was that, he should have realised he was a representative of his people, the people of the West Indies, representative of black people. He should have been more aware. He should have turned it down. But as often happens in those things, once you've made a mistake, instead of coming straight out and holding up his hands, his initial response was to kind of dig in and sort of try to justify it. And you just start looking, it looks even more inappropriate, if you like, once you start doing that. So it was a big storm. Everyone around the West Indies, from politicians, newspapers, were saying that Garry Sobers should be stripped of the West Indies captaincy. It was only really in his native Barbados that there was any real sort of support for him. It ended up with letters flying backwards and forwards from England to Barbados, to the High Commission there. And, it really did become a sort of international incident. In the end, he kind of gave what sort of purported to be an apology. But even then, a lot of people said, well, maybe he could have done a little bit more. Maybe instead of just apologising and sort of covering his own back, maybe someone who had the profile and the weight of opinion behind him that someone like Sobers had could have done a bit more, could have said a bit more, could have taken the opportunity to actually come out against that sort of regime and make a stand. But that just wasn't the way he approached things. It just wouldn't it really have never gone through his mind to do that.
Yeah, and again, as we started from the beginning of the interview, he comes from a dirt poor background, and I'm not justifying it, but if somebody owes you 600 quid, in 1960s or 70s money, that's not, for 48 hours, that's not a bad payday.
No, it wasn't, and he was getting towards the end of his career. He didn't really know what was coming next. It was the period of cricket where A, players hadn't made that much, and B, whatever money he had made, he had allowed to sort of slip through his fingers very quickly. He led as we said, quite a lavish lifestyle. He wasn't one for putting stuff away in the bank. And it wasn't a period in cricket where coaching post-playing was a big career opportunity, and it wasn't one of the times when there was loads of commentary opportunities. So he didn't really know what life was going to look like after cricket. So any money he could get, he was going to take. It certainly wasn't a deliberate, I know what I'm doing, I'm going to turn my back on it, I don't care. It really was sort of naivety on his part.
One of the great things, some of the pictures in the book, and one that is absolutely gorgeous, I think, and I'm glad they gave it a full page, is Queen Elizabeth II knighting him at Garrison Savannah Racecourse.
Yes.
It's a beautiful picture.
It is, and it meant a lot to Garry. Garrison Savannah Racecourse is a very short walk from where Garry grew up. It's a massive racecourse with sort of a stand. If you think of a square, it has a stand on one side, and then three sides of the square is basically the road, and the locals will go, and still do, go and sit there and watch the racing for free. And Garry was always big into horse racing, big into gambling. So he would spend a lot of time there as a child sort of watching the racing for free. So to think that he would ever go back there and that was going to be the place where the Queen would put the sword on his shoulder was something obviously completely unthinkable, but has a real poignancy to it because of that was the location that he did it, rather than Buckingham Palace, for example. So when it comes to writing, because you've done this sort of thing before, when it comes to writing a book about Garry Sobers, I mean, is it now that the time is right to take an appraisal? There's enough time gone between these, the furore of him playing for the week. I mean, at least he didn't get the sort of reception that Tony Gregg got when he said he was going to make the West Indies grovel that famous time, and chaos then assumed the next Test match. But what I mean is do you think the time is right to reappraise his impact on the sport? I think it is. I mean, for one reason, he's coming up for his 90th birthday, so next year, so it's a bit of a landmark. It'll be 60 years since his fantastic 1966 series. And as I said earlier, it just hasn't been done, and there's a lot of people who kind of know the name vaguely, but don't really understand the full context of his career and what exactly he achieved. He did change a lot of things in cricket, if you like. So many of cricket's great historical feats sort of revolve around him. You know, when he beat Len Hutton's Test match record and got 365, the record that Lara eventually broke, first man to hit 6 6s. He's still at the top of so many statistical categories in cricket. Can you imagine what he would have earned and what he would have been like in the Indian Premier League? I mean, it's been astonishing what he could have been like. So it felt like it was the time to do it. It hadn't been done before. There isn't a really sort of comprehensive look at his career, and I felt that someone like Garry Sobers deserved at least someone having a crack at it.
The book is called Maestro, the portrait of Garry Sobers, cricket's greatest all-rounder. Listeners, you can order it via our own virtual bookstore on the TRE website. If people want to find you online, David, and say nice things to you, where's the best place to go?
I am on X or Twitter for those who are a bit more old school. I am at David_Tossell, Tossell.
The book.
Always happy to hear from people.
Marvellous. The book. Well, thank you for joining me today. It's been brilliant to speak to you. The book is called Maestro, a portrait of Garry Sobers, cricket's greatest all-rounder. It's by David Tossell, who's been here today. David, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you this morning.
Thanks for having me, Giles.